When you're in a zoo, you'd expect to find animals, right? But did you know that a few decades ago, colonial powers captured and exhibited indigenous people in zoos as well? And their reasons were beyond disturbing.
In September 1905, visitors to the Bronx Zoo found a new exhibit. Standing in the corner of a cage in the monkey house was not an animal, but a young man, dressed in a loincloth and carrying a bow and arrow. Later on, bones would be scattered about the bottom of the cage to add to the atmosphere.
In September of 1906, a startling display awaited visitors at the Bronx Zoo. Instead of being greeted by an exotic animal, spectators found a young black man confined to a cage within the monkey house. Clad in nothing but a loincloth and wielding a bow and arrow, he stood as an unsettling spectacle. This young man's name was Ota Benga. Now, he wasn't particularly tall, but his body was lean and strong, honed by years of traversing the Congo rainforest from where he lived. His head was shaved, and his dark brown eyes held the quiet wisdom of his land. Laughter lines crinkled around the corners when he smiled, a smile that flashed a hint of something quite unusual. His front teeth were sharp and pointy, like that of sharks, a cultural practice of his tribe. From these descriptions alone, you could assume that he was quite the spectacle to behold. He was a beautiful human being with features that told a story. He was the embodiment of human strength, able to withstand the harshness of life in a country colonized at the time by the cruel King Leopold II. Unfortunately, this was not what many people saw when he was taken and exhibited in the zoo. Ota Benga was thrown with the monkeys as crowds gawked at him with eyes filled with curiosity and prejudice. He was presented as a primitive and inferior being, the missing link between apes and humans. In that dungeon with animals, was forced to carry out acts for the amusement of visitors, his dignity stripped away with each passing day. The cruel display sparked outrage among African American clergymen and activists who demanded his release. Eventually, Ota Benga was freed from the zoo and placed in the care of Reverend James H. Gordon, who arranged for him to live in an orphanage. He eventually settled in Lynchburg. However, the scars of his trauma ran deep. Ota Benga struggled to adapt to American society. He stopped using bows and arrows for hunting, opting for shotguns or rifles instead. He had a dentist cap his sharp teeth to make his smile less startling to other people. He also became known by the less exotic name, Otto Bingo. But despite all of those drastic efforts to integrate, he found himself isolated and discriminated against, over and over. The pain and humiliation of his past haunted him relentlessly. Hence, in 1916, at the young age of 32, with a pistol in hand in a somber stable, Ota Benga removed the caps from his teeth and took his own life. Maybe if he had been more accepted by society, he would have been successful in creating a new life for himself. Maybe if they hadn't treated him like an animal, he would have loved himself more. And maybe if the murderous King Leopold II had not permitted Ota Benga's tribe to be ransacked, his wife and children killed, those disturbing thoughts wouldn't linger in his mind each day. Truly, his death was the fruit of human greed and racial discrimination. And sadly, there are many more stories like this throughout history, as many Western nations believed that the black race was closer to apes than humans. Interestingly, a study by Lindsay Pressman in 2017 reveals that the concept of race itself originally emerged during the era of European and American imperialism as a tool used to justify the subordination and subjugation of certain groups. It was merely a social construct and not a biological fact. It was designed to uphold imperialist policies. The study also states that the United States, contrary to popular belief, was founded not on democratic principles, but on scientific racial discrimination, the manipulation of scientific evidence to assert the inferiority of those who looked different from them. These manipulations included the misuse of theories like social Darwinism and the eugenics movement, as well as the creation of biased intelligence tests. In a time when scientific knowledge was highly regarded, these flawed methodologies were used to support pre-existing racist beliefs, and any evidence contradicting these views was often suppressed or distorted. In other words, scientific racial discrimination was used as an excuse to control and exploit other groups of people, and this allowed the dominant group to maintain their power and wealth. For instance, social Darwinism suggests that competition and struggle are natural and necessary aspects of human society, and that these processes lead to the advancement of the human race. They believe that those who are most fit or capable are more likely to succeed, while those who are less fit are more likely to fail. This belief is often used to justify social inequality, as social Darwinists argue that efforts to help the less fortunate or disadvantaged interfere with natural selection and the progress of society as a whole. But is it really progress if they still resort to the savage treatment towards other human beings, towards their very own species? In the end, progress may as well be subjective, as an ape that is able to retrieve a banana from a tall tree may be considered progress, just as humans develop more powerful weapons to conquer more land, and just as a child who starts from nothing learns basic human morals. Nevertheless, scientific racial discrimination was how they further pushed the belief that black individuals were inferior. This was how they further justified discriminatory practices such as slavery. This was how they further rose to power. By the time Ota Benga existed, we had already been far deep into all of this. Nations in power not only pushed the said inferiority of other groups, but also turned them into forms of entertainment, equal to animals in the zoo. And it was not confined to the zoo either. Circuses were one of the leading forms of commercial entertainment until the introduction of motion pictures. And for decades, one of the major circus attractions was sideshow displays of human beings who were widely advertised as Darwin's missing link, man-monkey, ape-man, or ape-woman. In other words, these human beings were used to prove that humans evolved from apes. Could you believe that these shows were historically one of the most convincing pieces of evidence for Darwinism for the masses at the time? These circus displays were often deceptively presented as evidence of a missing link between apes and humans, falsely supporting Darwin's theory of evolution. Diseased and deformed individuals were also exploited as sideshow freaks to prove Darwinism. And no other case would be a better first example than that of the spectacle known as the man-monkey, presented by the famous showman P.T. Barnum in the early 1860s. This spectacle was revealed just months after the release of Darwin's Origin of Species. The anatomy of the man-monkey was claimed to include the perfect head and skull of the orangutan, while the lower part of the face is that of the native African. He was, the circus claimed, examined by some of the most scientific men we have, and pronounced by them to be a connecting link between the wild native African and the brute creation. Literature from Kunhardt et al. Even calls him one of Barnum's all-time great human presentations, as Barnum's man-monkey was depicted on advertising posters as a savage creature and nothing less than the missing link. But before he even became the claimed missing link, this so-called man-monkey was merely a man, under the name of William Henry Johnson, who was plausibly struggling with microcephaly, a condition involving a smaller than normal head and impaired mental capabilities. And unlike what the advertisements portrayed him, research revealed that he was likely born in New Jersey as one of 6 children in a very poor African-American family. Now, as you can infer from all of this, his life had not been easy. In fact, it was quite terrible, as his very own parents agreed to allow the circus to display him in return for money. From there, he was billed as a missing link, supposedly caught in Africa and displayed in a cage. P.T. Barnum purchased the right to display Johnson from the circus and gave him a new look. A custom furry suit was tailored for him, and his hair was styled into a pointed shape, enhancing the effect of his sloping brow. With that new identity, he was called various names, such as the Man-Monkey, Zip the Pinhead, and the What Is It? He worked as a circus performer thereafter until he died from bronchitis. That is the real story behind this claimed missing link. Isn't it quite disturbing that black individuals, disabled folks, or even both, had to endure those mockeries? William Henry Johnson and Ota Benga weren't the only ones who suffered through those offenses. There were many more, with one even ending up as a tragic love story. This is the tale of Julia Pastrana. Now this one had quite a shocking ending indeed, but before we get there, let's journey from the beginning of her story, shall we? Julia Pastrana's early life is clouded with mystery. One of her managers once claimed she was discovered as an infant that had been abandoned in a remote region in Central America. But more likely, she was born to a tribe of Sierra Madre Indians in the state of Sinaloa on the west coast of Mexico. Either way, she was only a young girl at the age of 20 when she was brought to New York. But Julia was different from other girls her age, quite different. She had an overdeveloped ape-like jaw pushed forward, a long beard with mustache, and her entire face and body, with the exception of the palms of her hands and the soles of her feet, was covered with thick black curly hair. She also had a broad flat nose, thick lips, large ears, and in other ways was remarkably ape-like. These traits, plus her thick short neck and her 4 feet 6 inch height, would only lead her to being known as a semi-human, between a human being and an orangutan, an ape woman, and Darwin's missing link. But as these missing link stories go, she was once again only framed to be such. In reality, Julia was actually suffering from several genetic diseases, including genetic hypertrichosis terminalis, which causes excessive hair growth, and gingival hyperplasia, leading to an abnormal ape-like jaw. Julia may also have had defective ovaries, and possibly a tumor or other abnormalities that caused her ovaries to produce too many male hormones. Unfortunately, treatments for this condition were unknown at the time, and Julia was only one of at least 50 verified people who have suffered from hirsutism. All of these physical characteristics of hers were quick to spot and easy to judge, but underneath all of those lies the reality that she was still just a girl. Some reports suggest that she eventually learned to read and found solace reading romantic novels, envisioning a future where she would be admired and beautiful like the heroines she read about. She frequently interacted with journalists and was consistently described as kind, gentle, friendly, sociable, and intelligent. These characteristics directly refuted claims that she was less than human. Brought into the world of sideshows and exhibitions, Julia Pastrana would wear costumes that exposed her legs, arms, and shoulders so people could see her thick body hair. Her appearance on stage elicited audible gasps, screams, and even fainting from the audience. Not content with merely showcasing her physique, she transformed the exhibition into a performance. Dancing, singing, and entertaining the crowd, she earned stormy applause after each dance. Her mezzo-soprano voice, often heard in Spanish or English songs, was described as tender and sweet, revealing her humanity. Actually, her performances were so captivating that her ape-woman persona wasn't always convincing to the audience. Some suspected her of being an African-American woman perpetuating a hoax. Naturally, these doubts threatened the show's success, so her manager arranged for an examination by physician Alexander B. Mott. Mott concluded that she was indeed a woman, albeit a hybrid, where human traits dominated over those of an orangutan. To further reinforce their claims, Julia was also examined by Cleveland physician S. Brainerd. In the 1800s, medical training, particularly regarding genetics, was often inadequate. Brainerd compared Julia's hair to that of an African person under a microscope and erroneously determined that she had no trace of African blood. He also misclassified her as a distinct species. Nevertheless, her ape-woman reputation was most of the time successful and raked her managers a lot of money. In fact, she was so successful that when her last manager, Theodore Lent, discovered she intended to leave him for another manager, he persuaded her that he loved her to keep her under his management. And with the poor girl longing for true acceptance and appreciation, the two got married. Eventually she became pregnant, and it's believed that upon seeing her child inherit many of her physical traits, she was so heartbroken that she passed away just 5 days after giving birth. This was not true, of course, as the official account states that she died in Moscow, Russia, of complications following childbirth. In a sick display, her husband admitted spectators to her deathbed, where her last words as reported by her husband were, "I die happy. I know I have been loved for myself." This fits nicely into the 19th century fascination for grand last words, but it seems a little too perfect to be true, is it not? Now let me ask you, dear viewer, do you think Julia truly believed that she was loved and died believing that she was? Share your sentiments in the comments. Nevertheless, any lingering questions about her husband's sincerity were erased when he allowed her body and that of their son, who only lived for 36 hours, to be preserved by chemical means. He then proceeded to exhibit their remains for a hefty admission fee, exploiting their tragedy for profit. Eventually, he found another ape-woman wife named Zenora, and within a few years he became a wealthy man from his ape-women exhibitions. But his luck soon caught up with his sinister deeds. In 1884, he went insane, was committed to a Russian insane asylum, and soon thereafter died. But even after his death, the exhibition of the preserved bodies of Julia and her son continued in Europe for decades. And there ends the tragic story of Julia Pastrana, a girl who only sought to make a beautiful impact in this world. At the end of it all, she was just another beautiful individual whose differences were exploited to promote a sense of inferiority among those who did not conform to Western standards of appearance. Such practices occurred repeatedly throughout history. Fortunately, times have changed. Modern medical research has definitively debunked all of these alleged missing link cases. They were simply ordinary humans with various genetic conditions or diseases, most of which have now been accurately identified. With all of these said, the reason why we wanted to share these stories to all of you is not to promote hate and disgust, but to remind everyone of the huge importance of respect for fellow human beings regardless of their background. Through years, humans are known to progress, so it is our duty to ensure that we also progress in terms of morals, never to return to those harsher times. No matter how much we've been hurt, may we never stoop to someone else's level of insult and mockery. May we always strive to be better, working earnestly and humbly towards each of our own definitions of success. Thank you for sticking with us until the end of this journey. If you found value in this video, we'd appreciate it if you give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on post notifications to stay tuned with more insightful and inspiring stories. Take care, and see you next time.